You are listening to the People Centric Podcast, where we talk through the toughest challenges that people face at work and give practical advice to fixing those challenges. Thanks for joining our movement to create workplaces that are happier, healthier, aligned, and empowered by putting people at the center of all that we do.
Hey, People Centric leaders, it's Don Harkey from People Centric here. You know, when we work with clients, one of the things that our clients say about us often is that we feel sometimes like we're therapists, like we're getting deep into their personal thoughts and feelings, not because we pry and plug into all the things that they do in their personal lives, but because a lot of times we as humans bring our personal lives into the business, and it has an impact for how we work with each other, how we communicate, how we manage our team, how we work with our managers, how we view our company, all of those different things. So today we thought a really great topic for this episode would be to talk about some common head trash that we see in business. And when we say head trash, we don't mean that there's something necessarily wrong with you, right? Head trash is the idea that there's stuff that I like to think of it as like you pick up rocks in your shoe throughout your life. Something happens to you and our life experiences add up to each other, and it causes our brain to hardwire some things. And sometimes we get stuck in different areas. And I think most of us have some head trash that we try to work through, or some of us times we're not aware of it. And we're trying to become aware of it, and it does impact how we work. So we decided we're going to jump into that topic today. So we have Diana and Stephanie with us. And so Diana, if you could just could you make a list of all the head trash that you have for all
Sure,
of our
yeah.
listeners out there? Just go ahead and
Yeah.
just reveal your darkest secrets, please. Go ahead.
Well, I'm a posture. I'm manipulative. I don't like people, but work for a company called People Centric. I could go on, but I feel like that's a good start.
That's a good start. I'm writing those down for our next review. Just to
Which
make sure I know.
which is today, I think.
Which is today,
Yeah.
this afternoon.
So
So that was a bold move to tell me all those things beforehand. I was just joking, but you jumped right
Don,
into it.
if you didn't know by now, you haven't been paying attention.
That's true. I guess 11 years working together would probably
It
reveal
would
all
do
of that
that.
stuff.
Yeah.
That would do that. Yeah. Yeah. Stephanie, welcome to the episode. I would say let's reveal your darkest podcast, your darkest head trash. But let's keep talking about Diana. What other head trash did Diana not mention that
Yeah,
you
I
would
like
like to
this
talk
a lot
about?
better because I was going to say no thank you to revealing mine. I don't like this
Mhm.
question. But also I think Diana's great. So you're just not going to win me to this side today.
Well, we're certainly not going to talk about my
She
head
is-
trash if that's where
She
you're
is
going.
Staying in the light, you guys, and I am here for it.
Staying in the light. Don't go to the darkness. So,
She
all right.
woke up and chose sunshine.
That's fantastic.
I will admit to that. I generally am an optimist and try to be positive. I mean, catch me on the right day and I will rip you a new one. But today's not that day. I'm feeling good.
I like that. That's fantastic. So as we get into these, there's 7 of them that we're going to talk about, and we'll share some examples on how it impacts teams. Some of them apply a lot to executives, some apply a lot more to like frontline folks. So I think there's going to be something in this for everybody here as you're listening along. But, when we talk about head trash, I think it's important, first of all, before we dive into these 7, to say, like, what are we talking about? Can you really address head trash? Like, what is it, and can we really address it? Do we see clients get better by recognizing what's happening inside their heads?
I mean, I think they definitely do, right? I think it's, similar to therapy when you can identify what is causing you pain or holding you back, then you can begin to address it. Or it's even how we talk about when we coach someone from a professional setting, like, okay, if they can identify what that problem is, then we can work to solve it, right? It's when you can't identify what the problem is and you just start feeling like stuck or nothing's working or I'm just not being successful in the way I want to be, but I don't know why. So I think head trash is super real and we see it. I mean, I think every single human being has some form of head trash. And I'd say, you talked about this a second ago, Don, but like kind of the difference between head trash and maybe real like trauma or something in the mental health space, which is not what we're talking about, is head trash is typically something that you could change or you could work on, or it's a perceived barrier, not maybe a true barrier or something that really would take working with, a mental health professional to overcome.
Yeah, that's a great point. There's things that it's not sometimes I think I know I used to fall into this is you think we just have head trash, you just kind of shake your head and get it out. Like I'm just gonna address it. Just stop doing that. And that's not really how our psychology works, right? Our brains are constantly wiring itself, and we do it in ways where we are both consciously aware and unconsciously aware. And some of the unconscious wiring that happens to us throughout the course of our life causes us to think a certain way, and we don't even recognize that we're thinking a little bit differently than other people do. So that's kind of what that head trash is, but you can't just decide to rewire it. It's you kind of have to become aware of it, and then you have to set a new habit for things. We use the example in some new training that we put together on change management, where we talk about like I was speaking at a college class, and I went into the class and I arrived there a little bit early, and I sat down just at one of the desks. And this was near the end of the semester. So you know how people are in a class, they typically end up sitting in the same seats every day. You just get into the habit of doing that. Well, they'd been deep into the habit of doing that. And so I sat at a desk, and these kids are walking in, and they all noticed me sitting there because I'm not supposed to be there. I'm something that's different. Something's not like the rest. And so they start looking at me. So I start chatting with them, and I ask, who sits in this desk? And they said, oh, and I'll make up the name. It's Carl sits in this desk. And when Carl walks in, he's always the last one that comes in. He comes in right before class starts, and he sits in that desk. And I said, well, let's watch how much a creature of habit we are and how hardwired our brains are, and watch what happens when Carl walks in and sees me sitting there as he's frantically trying to find his seat before class starts. And so everybody waited, everybody got in there, and everybody's watching. Then Carl walks in, and Carl just walks in real super casual, takes about 5 steps over to the desk, gets about 3 steps away, and stops and sees me and just froze. And like the total look of confusion on his face. Like it's not a hard problem. There are other desks, there are other spots to sit, but just total look of confusion on his face. And of course, the whole room kind of laughs because they're like, they see it. If you think about it, if finding your desk, a different desk that you've been sitting in as a habit, is a hard thing to break out of, what about some of these other things we're going to talk about that it's a lot harder to take? It's a lot harder to understand. So you have to go back and you have to unwind. You have to understand where those things come from to be able to start to change habits.
Yeah. And I think a lot of times people just go to the desk, right? Like you're not thinking about the ways that you're incorrect in your thinking. You're not thinking about your own head trash. It's not head trash to you. It's just how you think. And so I think a lot of times it takes an outsider to look at you and be like, hey, why are you thinking the way that you're thinking? That's not a normal way to think about it. Or, this is stalling you, and this is a barrier that you continue to have. What's happening? So I think it takes some outside perspective to really see the head trash inside of your own head.
Yeah. And it's good. Like this stuff isn't a flaw in our brain. It's something that you have to work with in how you think. I mean, where it's useful for you is like when you get up in the morning, it usually doesn't take a lot of mental energy, right? You have a routine that you get up and you brush your teeth and you take a shower and you get dressed and all those types of things. Your brain does that. It's a shortcut so that you can focus on higher level things. So all of this stuff. But if you take it to work with you and you get the wrong stuff in there, you might get a rock in your shoe or some head trash that actually impacts relationships. So let's jump into the first one here. The first one is one we've done an entire podcast episode on. It's one we talk about a lot, but we thought this would be a nice introduction for those of you listening for a long time. And it's the narrative paradigm. The narrative paradigm. So let's talk about what is the narrative paradigm in terms of head trash.
I think any narrative paradigm could be head trash, right? Like if you're constantly making stories in your own head to fit how other people are reacting or interacting, you're constantly assigning a you're constantly thinking about how this person's going to react to you or what they're going to do. That kind of stuff gets in our way. And I think that's the thing we're talking about, is building the stories about people around you that either are or are not true, right? But you're still assigning the intent, you're assigning the story, you're looking for things to confirm your own bias, right? Those types of things are what get in the way. when we talk about narrative paradigm.
Yeah, the words narrative meaning story, paradigm meaning theme. The idea is that when your brain works on some, collects information, you quickly create a story around that thing. The problem is that the story is often not entirely accurate. So you might have an interaction with a coworker, like you come in the morning and a coworker comes by and you say, "Hey, good morning. How's your day?" And they say, "Fine." And then they just walk away. Your story might start to say, "Well, that guy's kind of a jerk. Why did you do that? Why didn't you come and talk to me? I was going to talk to you and I was being nice and you're kind of a jerk and you're standoffish." The problem is in our brain, once we start to create that story in our head, we start to hardwire it into our head. And now that person's a jerk. And we look for evidence to support the story we've already created. So that person might come to you later and say, "Hey, I brought some donuts in for everybody." And you might, instead of thinking, "Wow, that was really nice of you bringing in donuts," you're thinking, "Well, that guy's a jerk and he brought in donuts. So why did he bring in donuts? Oh, he's probably kissing up to the boss. That's why that guy's doing that." So then we get lost in that paradigm. And the problem is we all think like that. This isn't one that you can change. This is literally how we think in terms of humans. So the question is, like, how do narrative paradigms impact us at work?
Oh
I
man.
mean, I think you kind of hit it there on the head of like we make villains of people who aren't villains often because it's very rare that we write an incorrect hero narrative. Like our brains kind of tend to the negative in stories, and maybe we do, and we see that from time to time where we've made someone a hero or they really weren't. But I think it's far more common that we make someone a villain when they aren't. And the donut story is perfect because we start assigning negative intent to like sometimes small things or sometimes like just a mistake. Like, oh, somebody forgot to add you to the calendar invite. And all of a sudden I'm being excluded and it was intentional. And I'm sure they have this meeting agenda that they didn't want me on because they know I'm going to push back on this. When in reality, it was just a mistake. Right. And so it really impacts our relationships with people and then how we talk to others, how we think about others, how we treat others. Because again, it's very rare that we're making someone else the hero. But we also do that sometimes too, right? Sometimes our narrative paradigm will make a lot of excuses for people who have bad behavior, right? That we excuse a lot of things. But again, far more common that we go negative and then we start treating people in not the most kind way, or even if we don't outwardly treat them that way inside, we've got a lot of negative talk about them. And so that means we start ignoring them or trying to not work with them on projects and avoiding them in the hallway and weird stuff like that.
And then you have to think about the dynamics of that because the person that you're ignoring and that you think is a jerk, it's impacting how you're treating that person. So then go to their narrative paradigm and how do they think about you? Well, suddenly you seem kind of standoffish and like you brought in the donuts and you rolled your eyes for some reason when you brought in the donuts and they're like, "What? I brought in donuts to like try to make friends with this person. I don't understand why you're being a jerk." And suddenly you're both jerks to each other. And then you have a whole relationship that spins off, right? The way we treat other people impacts how they treat us in return. So it creates waves amongst our teams at work when we think about these things as heroes or villains, right? So that becomes a big problem. So go back and check out our other episode on that one, on narrative paradigms, and you can learn more about that one. That's one that we love doing that one as a keynote presentation and a workshop for teams to talk about that one because we see that one impact so every team. It doesn't impact some teams, it impacts actually every team. And so the cure for that is just being curious, asking questions. Don't judge other people's intentions. Like you mentally have to think, if I am frustrated with Carl because I think Carl is a jerk, maybe I should spend some more time with Carl to get to know a little bit more about Carl. Or if Carl came in that morning and I said good morning and Carl blew me off and really, really bothers me, I could go back to Carl later and say, "Carl, can we talk for a second? I said good morning to you and you kind of blew me off this morning." And then if Carl could say, "Oh, I'm so sorry. My cat died this morning and I was just really sad and I was just really focused and I had to go jump on a phone call and I'm sorry I was distracted." Then suddenly Carl doesn't sound like a villain anymore. And then you can get a little bit more. There's very few villains, actual villains in the world. Most of us don't work with actual villains. And most of us don't work with actual heroes either. We're actually more complex than that. So that's the thing. All right, let's do the second one. You guys ready for the second one? Are you excited about this? Pumped up?
So pumped.
So pumped. So ready. Let's do this. Let's do this. As we edit this podcast, can we add more enthusiasm to Stephanie's voice just now? Can we just turn up the enthusiasm knob? Do we
Oh, I
have
don't
that?
like your tone now.
Wow. Ah, I just became the villain, y'all. That's what just happened.
This is how it
This
happens.
is how
This
it
is how
happens.
it begins.
It starts here. It starts here. All right. Number two, except piece of head trash that we see quite a bit is the I've got to please everyone or make people like me head trash. And this is the person that's stuck in the idea that maybe their value is what they provide for the rest of the team. And so they constantly want to help everybody else and do stuff. So they're the quick person to jump in and solve problems. And I will take this and run with it, which all sounds like something you on an interview would love to say. Like, yeah, I jump in, I solve problems, I help my team. And you think the interviewer's gonna be like, yeah, that's great. And that's true. But where does this cause problems? Why are we talking about this in terms of head trash?
I don't know, because everything you said just sounded great. Like I don't see a problem here. And as the president of the Recovering People Pleasers Club, we take offense to this section.
Well, ironically, that does not please me. So
Well, that's hard for us.
I just put Stephanie in a paradox. She's like,
The
I feel
look
bad,
on
but I don't feel
Stephanie's
bad.
face was just like, oh my God, I hate it here. Like she just for a second was like, no, you could see it.
Yeah, I will fully admit to this of I am I call it recovering people pleaser because it's something that I've worked on a lot in my life. I think it was just indicative of how I grew up. Of like, yeah, you try to make everyone happy. And it really, I think, spurs from trying to do the right thing and trying to treat everyone well. But yeah, Dawn, you're right. It comes usually from like this insecurity that if I don't do all of this, if I don't please everyone, then like there's an underlying belief that nobody really likes me just for me or who I am. And so that's the therapy part of it that you can talk to your therapist about. This is what I talk to my therapist about. But I do think it gets to become head trash in business, and we see this particularly a lot with leaders and managers or executives, because then it becomes I have to fix everyone's problems. So not just, hey, the problems that someone in my position should be working on and managing, but I have to not only fix everyone's problems, but they all have to be happy, and that it is my sole responsibility essentially for them to be happy at work or fulfilled in their role. And while again, it sounds beautiful and we all want that, like I think everybody would be like, yes, I want people on my team to love their job and feel fulfilled. But we have to admit at the end of the day, we only play a small part in that, right? As leaders. And so most of that rests with that person and how they feel about themselves, how they feel about their lives. And so we can ask good questions and we can make changes we can make and really that are within our control and influence. But at the end of the day, if someone is really unhappy in their role or their job, we can't fix that for them. And I think that's really hard for a lot of us when we see that someone is unhappy or something's not going well for them. We want to jump in and we want to fix it, but we have to realize those are moments we are relying on, we're leading through our own insecurities instead of just saying, hey, like what's going on with you? What can I do to make this better? And then what parts are you kind of owning and working on? And I think there's really kind ways to have those conversations. So even if you're someone a people pleaser, you probably struggle with having those conversations, call us and we can walk you through how to do that. But I think that's where it becomes the block, because then we can't move forward unless everyone is happy. I can't enjoy my role if someone is unhappy. We make decisions by unanimous consensus. And it really holds things back in the company, and it will kill you. Like it will drain you completely as a leader, because you can't make everyone happy. It's just impossible. And so you will beat yourself up. You will beat the crap out of yourself in this process, and you will walk away really wounded from it, and everyone else is just going to go like, like she didn't fix it for me. And then you've set this weird expectation that you're responsible for that.
Yeah, thanks for being so vulnerable on that. Because I think that I'm a secret card carrying member of also that same club of saying, like, I'm just, if everybody could be happy, let me just solve problems. The things that are out there, I'll problem. We jokingly call it on the road vanilla ice leadership. If there was a problem, I'll solve it, and then check out the hook while my DJ revolves it. Sorry, I had to say the second line. I don't know why I had to get that out. Otherwise, it was going to be in my head and my head was going to hurt all day. But the problem, Stephanie, you did a great job of laying out like why that's a problem for the individual thinking about that. I think where we see it as even as a problem for the team is what it's like anti-empowering, right? It's like if I'm not going to, and I've seen that as a leader, and I've struggled with that sometimes, and I catch myself, and then I don't struggle with it, and then I see really good things happen. If people centric is dealing with a problem, and I think I'm going to go in the corner and try to block it from the rest of the team, and I'm going to solve it, what happens is then you all don't own the solutions to the problem, and you don't see the problem, you don't get visibility of it, and I start to get resentful of the team because I'm working by myself and you don't get what I'm doing for you. Where if you flip it around and say, okay, like during the pandemic, I was thinking about that. Like we really just were very transparent, like, hey, this is a big challenge. We've all got to figure out how to work together on this. We're going to see some revenue problems, all that stuff. But I brought it to the whole team, and the whole team came together and said, all right, let's figure this out. And it brought us closer as a team, and it allowed the team to do really cool things and feel like you had some control in their destiny. And so that's the problem with that that's the problem with pleasing everybody. It sounds good on the surface. Sounds good of like, okay, well, I'll just serve everybody else and it'll be great. It's not good for the individual, and it's really not totally good for the team. There's some problems with that as well. So
Yeah, I agree with that. And from the team perspective, I will say like anytime I've had a leader come to me and they kind of unburden that, right? Where they're like, hey, like I do need your guys' help with this. It's always that move like, oh my gosh, like yes, of course I want to help. I wish I had known that. I wish you knew, that you were trying to solve this alone and I could have helped you. And so I think it is like, it should be a relief as a leader to not carry all of those things. Like let your team help you, like use those strengths. And I think it's also like understanding the power of the collective intelligence there too, of like all of us is smarter than one of us. And I think that's a hard truth sometimes for people pleasers, because like, well, if I just fix it for them, then it'll feel better for them. And that is the disempowerment and like just relying on just what you can do versus like, wow, if we all worked on it together, it could really empower my team. We could come up with an even better solution. I wouldn't have to carry all that by myself. Cause I think I will hear leaders say a lot like, well, I don't want my team to like feel that burden or be carrying too much. And you're like, you get into this mentality of like, you're protecting your team from bad things. But in reality, you're hurting your team because you're not giving them the opportunity to learn to solve those type of problems. So then suddenly you become the only one who can save us, right? And it's disempowering to the team. Like, yeah, I think, but it's hard. And I think a lot of us struggle with this.
I think a lot of again, with my magic headphones, I can hear the people who are listening to this podcast, and I think a lot of people are going, amen. That's me. You're describing me right now, which is why we're talking about this, right? Because this is all stuff that if we recognize it, then we can start to work to adjust for it. All right. So the third one that we're going to talk about is one that we're going to use a phrase that was made famous by Apple and around Steve Jobs. And it's called the reality distortion field. One of my favorite Steve Jobs stories. There's lots of stories about how creative he was as a leader and all those things, but he also had some big challenges as a leader. If like you read his biography, he's probably one of those examples of the heroes. Like we have a hero paradigm on Steve Jobs and we think he was all great, and it's not all great. Like none of us are like that. Nobody can live up to that. So I'm not bashing him, but a good example of reality distortion field that I read, I think it was in his biography, was when one of the iPhones came out, they had a presentation from this company that created this product called Gorilla Glass. And it's the casing on the iPhone. It's literally the glass on the iPhone is what it could be at that time. Now, if you remember the early iPhones, if you could drop it just a little bit on your desk and the whole thing would crack. if you drive. And so people were constantly breaking their phones and you have to go get the glass replaced. And it's not that easy to do that and all that stuff. So they knew that was a big threat to iPhone. So when this person presented this new technology for Gorilla Glass, that was a lot more impact resistant. It wouldn't scratch as easily and all of that. Steve Jobs was super excited about it and they saw the presentation and they were getting ready to launch this new iPhone. And I'm going to get the dates wrong, but it was like in July and the launch was in October. And the guy's just presenting this new technology. Like they don't even make it. Nobody makes this glass yet. And Steve Jobs says, that's great. We'll take it. And the other guy goes, like, what do you mean we'll take it? And he goes, well, we're going to put it on the new iPhone for October to launch it. And so his engineers look and they said, suddenly they're like, we haven't designed it for the Gorilla Glass. We're not thinking about that. And then the guy that provided the Gorilla Glass goes, we haven't manufactured this. Like, we don't have a plant up and running to make this. We've made this in the lab. There's no way we'll be ready to make this for the October launch. Like, that's crazy. And Steve Jobs laughed and put his hand on the guy's shoulder and said, don't be scared. And then walked out of the room. This is the reality distortion field. And he's famous for it. It's like, nope, I'm not going to look at the reality of the situation. I'm going to twist it. Sometimes it also shows up as like, I can't handle bad news. Don't give me any bad news. I don't want to hear it. Everything is awesome. Everything is fine. And don't tell me anything bad. So let's talk about reality distortion field. How does that impact business? What's the downsides of that?
I mean, there's probably a lot of downsides. I think the biggest effect is when other people around you see the reality and you just refuse. It causes that disharmony, that like, okay, what am I doing? Am I crazy? What am I seeing that you're not seeing? And how come I can't get you to see it? And if I'm going to have to do all of this work to get to your vision, like I need you to trust me and I need you to hear me, and I'm not feeling heard. And I think it leads to a lot of just miscommunication and feeling unheard and this like disengagement, because it feels like you're constantly going after something that doesn't exist or isn't real, right? And you're like, how do I show this person that this isn't real? This is not what's actually happening. How do I fix this? And I think it makes people feel a little crazy. Like it makes people be like, am I the one who's nuts? Like what is happening? Why can't I get this person to see what I see?
Yeah, it starts feeling like you're being gaslit a little bit of like, am I really missing something, or do I not understand the situation totally? Maybe I didn't know that person or that vendor or customer as well as I thought I did or knew our industry. And so you start feeling like you're being gaslit a little bit. And like, spoiler, sometimes you might be. And so it's good to look into that. But yeah, I think what it starts feeling like to the team, because I've experienced this before where I worked with someone that had this and would do this often, it just starts feeling like the leader doesn't really care how you feel about it or how it's going to impact your day to day or your life or the community or the whole business or whatever we're trying to do. And so then I think you switch into the narrative paradigm and you're like, well, this person has no empathy and they don't care, and they're all about the profit or they're all about the glory. And it kind of starts then feeling akin to something we're going to talk about here in a second, of like narcissism, of like, you aren't even thinking about how I feel. You're just thinking about how great it's going to be for you. And that lack of harmony can tear apart a team. It can absolutely decimate a team.
It strikes me as we talk about these that it's really tempting to hear these things, and it's easy to look at other people and see them. It's harder to look at yourself and see them. And I think this one, especially, like if you have a reality distortion field, you're inside the reality distortion field, which to you is just called reality, right? It's distorted. So you see that. So I think as a leader, if you are worried about this, the question you should ask yourself is like, how often do I get feedback? Are people truly comfortable coming and giving me feedback? If I bring in an outside person from time to time, and it's a role that we play quite a bit, is we'll come in from the outside and tell you your baby's ugly if that's what needs to happen. And how do you respond to that? I think that's the biggest thing, is think about, how do you respond? If I tell you, hey, this is a real problem over here, and you get defensive and you push back, or you get angry, or you challenge, or you get intense and start really shoving back, then it's going to be like, oh, I guess I can't tell you those things anymore. And then you create that own reality distortion field. So I want to encourage everybody, as we go through this head trash, to not just think about other people, because I know a lot of people are thinking, yeah, that's my boss. So what do I do if my boss is this? And we're saying, well, okay, that could be helpful to you to know that, and maybe work through that with them. But what's super powerful is to think about where are your problems at? So if this is the one that's dangerous, if you have a reality distortion field, you probably don't know it. You may not know it. So you're going to have to look for outside evidence for that.
Yeah. And I think, just to maybe say, like, how do you do that? It is like, watch for the clues around you. Like, if your whole team is saying to you, like, I don't understand this, I don't get it, or you're getting a lot of pushback, it's not to say that you're wrong, right? Of like, I think about that Steve Jobs story of like, okay, like that made it for Apple. It was a big move for their company. So it wasn't that he was wrong, right? But like, it is thinking about like, okay, just taking a moment and say, okay, what are the negative consequences maybe of doing this thing? Or yeah, is there a group or people that I'm not thinking about how this could impact? And so I think it's also making sure you have those people on your team or in your life, or yeah, bring in people from the outside who are going to like give you that honest feedback, or at least key you in and say, hey, I think you need to slow down a little bit and just think about this some more. I'm not saying don't do it, but I think you need to think about this, and identify who those people are that you trust, and give them permission to give you that feedback. And so that way, that's your signal of like, you asked this person to do this. And so again, it's not saying that, you're just not going to do stuff. Cause I think if you have the reality distortion, you're immediately like, well, if everybody just said, accepted that, we wouldn't have any great ideas, and we wouldn't have all the technology we have today, and the innovators and the heroes of this. And you're like, okay, yes, but like, I think pre-identify those people. And so that way, when those people come to you and give you that feedback, it's your signal to pause and evaluate, or slow down a little bit, or maybe really, is this the thing I should do, or the way I should go? And again, it's not saying you just let everybody, tell you no, or change your mind, or give up on a great idea or innovation, but it's just recognizing that maybe there's something you are missing.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
if we spin it with your distortion, what if it made your idea better?
Yeah. And there are all of these ideas too, are not like I think our healthiest brains operate with dials, not switches. So none of these things, it's like, should we never ever do? Like, never think of yourself as a hero, never think of another person as a villain, never think about distorting reality, never challenge your team. It's always just dialed up, and Steve Jobs was dialed up to a 10. Now, I think the punchline of that story that I told was they actually did deliver the Gorilla Glass on time and got it on that new iPhone. So
They did.
in a lot of ways, like, yeah, that distortion field made him challenge his team to do things that they didn't think was possible. But there's plenty of other stories where that distortion field absolutely hurt him personally and professionally inside of his life. So there's a dial on all these things. We're not saying you shut them off. We're saying sometimes maybe if you're at a 9, maybe you should be at a 7, right? Or know when to dial to a 9, or when to dial to a 5, or whatever it is. Let's talk about the next one, toxic positivity. So the idea is, if everybody looks happy and are getting along, then we must be. Like, let's just spin it. So this is the person who, if there's a problem, they're always going to say, hey, this is fine. We can fix that. Everything's okay. I think I've got a quick story on this one I can think of. I think I've told this one before, but when there was a safety incident, a minor one that almost hurt somebody at a plant that I worked at. And we had a team that meets afterwards to analyze what happened and what was the root cause of that. And there were 2 potential root causes that we identified. And there are 2 very different causes that were out there. And so we were discussing those 2 causes, and there was a group of engineers, and we were debating back and forth of which one caused how did it happen? And there was a little bit of disagreement early on about which cause was the right one. And our safety manager at the time, who definitely suffered from this toxic positivity, could not handle that. Just like in the discussion, like, why are you guys fighting? Why are you guys fighting? And all the engineers in the room kept looking at him like, we're not fighting. We're trying to find the answer. Like, we're just debating. We're trying to find. And finally, he goes, you know what? Maybe you're both right. Maybe we should just write down that both causes were true. And it was technically impossible. Like, it was one or the other. Like, this literally was, did we go left or right? There's one answer to this question. It's not an opinion. We're going to find the facts for it. And eventually we got to it and we figured out what the actual cause was of it and we fixed that. But that's the toxic positivity. So sometimes we think, well, we should be positive at work, but when does it go too far?
So, go ahead, Diane.
Okay. I was going to say there's this scene in Inside Out, which is like a really cute Pixar film. And there's this scene where a character is upset, crying, sad. And the joy character, the happy character, comes over and is like, it's okay. You could be happy. It's fine. Just change your mind. Let's go jump around. And then the character just keeps crying. Like, the character does not be sad just because Joy is like, it's okay, everything's all right, there's silver linings, here's some gum. That didn't happen. It took the sad character, I believe her name is Sadness, to come over to this character and be like, hey, it's okay to be sad, and I'm just gonna sit with you and cry. And I think that right there just shows that people need to feel the feelings, and people need to be sad sometimes. People need to be mad sometimes. People need to be frustrated. People need to be annoyed, right? There's all of these deeper feelings that people need to feel, and then they can get past it. Then they can find a solution. Then they can find joy. But I think it really hinders teams if we don't let people feel the feelings, if we don't let people express what's happening. And I think too many times people do what your safety manager did, and just like, okay, let's just smooth it over. No, let's fight it out. Let's have the conversation. Let's feel the feelings. Let's be mad at each other. Let's be sad at what's going on. Let's have a funeral for the product we just killed. Like, I think it's really important to human nature to feel whatever they're feeling in the moment and then let it go.
It's a great scene in that movie. And I mean, you watch that and it's almost counterintuitive because Sadness sits down and says, yeah, that was awful. Right. Then you're kind of playing into it. But I think a very universal experience that probably most people have experienced is if you've lost somebody close to you and somebody else comes up to you and says, well, at least you had this time together, or at least they lived a long life, or at least this happened. That doesn't feel good. Like, I get why we do that. We're trying to help the other person, and it's hard to watch somebody else feel sad. But sometimes we have to say things aren't working very well. Or even on a team, like let's relate it back to a team. If the numbers aren't good, just trying continuously spinning them, well, it's going to be okay, prevents the team from confronting the reality of the situation and making the changes necessary to start to address those changes. So I get why we want to do that, but it can sometimes prevent us from taking the right steps forward.
Yeah. And Diana used the word like funeral there. And I think that's something that we forget in business. Like, our life is kind of defined by like weddings and funerals in that sense outside of work, but then at work, it's like weddings only celebrations. It can only be great. You can't have those like funeral moments. And I think it's something that our culture just generally really struggles with. We're a very like anti-death culture in America, in case you didn't know this. Other cultures are a lot more comfortable with like those loss and sadness and grief emotions than we are, because we kind of have just in general a little bit of toxic positivity ingrained in our American culture. But I think where it starts hurting you and hurting the team is that like you have to maintain this positive mindset no matter how difficult or dire. And then the team just starts repressing things. You start repressing things. We never really get to the bottom of what the problem was, like your story, Dawn, of like, we never really figure out what was wrong because we just decided like, well, it's not bad anymore. It's not bad right now. That problem's not happening right now. So why do we need to have the meeting and talk about it? Like, well, it's because we never actually figured out what was happening. And so it could happen again, or sometimes it sounds like the person in the meeting, when somebody brings up a problem or something that went wrong, then they're like, well, but then this good thing came of it though, right? And we wouldn't be here without that. And it's like, yes, that's true. But like those positive and negative emotions can coexist, and that is life, right? A book I read a couple years ago, if you want to read more on this, it's called No Cure for Being Human by Kate Bowler. And it does have like a religious aspect to it, but she talks about that and even her journey of being diagnosed with a late stage cancer in her 30s, and the things that people said to her that made her just realize, like, I think there's a toxic positivity problem here. People telling me I should be grateful that I have cancer and going through it. And obviously, no one's saying it quite that directly, but just the sentiment, and that we should just be grateful for everything. And no matter how bad it was, there's always a silver lining. And I think it's why we struggle with like just being real in our culture. And we compare on social media because nobody really puts the bad day on social media. Or if they do, it's like 2 weeks ago, I didn't get the promotion, but here's why that was the best thing that ever happened to me, right? Nobody posts like 15 minutes ago, I found out I lost out on the promotion because I scored 15 points less on the math section than Chad, right? Like we don't see that online. Sorry, Chads.
Hate that Chad guy.
Sorry, Chads. But I think it is that toxic positivity of like, we need to have those moments on our team where we just acknowledge like, this does suck and this is really bad. And yeah.
Pausing here with Rianne. I'm pausing. I'm cutting out. We're going to have to edit this out. This feels like a 2-part episode. We're like almost 40 minutes into this already, and we have 3 more to go. Are you guys cool with that? So we'll cut this. We'll cut this and say like, okay, this is going to be a I don't think we record the second part right now. We don't have to do that. No. We can read it on the next podcast recording, but I'm going to, are you all good with that? Instead of trying to, otherwise we're going to have to power through the next 3. And I think the next 3 are just as topic filled as these are. So,
yep.
All right. Ready? We're going to come back and go. Well, this has been a great discussion. We talked about these head trash of the narrative paradigm, the pleasing everybody, the reality distortion field, the toxic positivity. And guys, there's more head trash that we're going to talk about, but we're going to land this episode now and come back with a part 2 on more head trash in business, because this is something that impacts every single client, every single person, every person that's listening to this right now. There's something in your head. Promise you, there's something in your head that if you can get a little bit of a better handle on it, it will improve how you do your job, both as an employee and as a manager and as an executive. So we're going to circle back to this topic. Excited to see you next time. Please shoot us some comments. Tell us what you think about the podcast. Shoot us ideas for the episodes, or just say hi. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks for joining us on the People Centric Podcast.
Wahoo. When is the next podcast? So that way we can...
Thank you for listening to the People Centric Podcast. We are so grateful for you joining us every week. If you like this content, please like and subscribe. Also, feel free to share on your social media with everyone that you know. It really does help us. If you would like to contact us, I have put our information in the show notes. Please reach out anytime. We love hearing from you. We will be back next week with a new topic. Until then, be well and lead well.